President Trump is expected to sign a new executive order to replace his current travel ban, and two of his top cabinet members, they spoke to the Mexican government to smooth over relations.
Political analysts Wendy Patrick and Laura Fink join us with more. Ladies, good morning.
Good morning, Shelley.
You know, as Raul was just mentioning, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly in Mexico, they were defending Trump's administration's new stance on illegal immigration. What were they doing there, Laura?
Well, they were playing Dustbuster for President Trump. And unfortunately, this is not a role that you want your Secretary of State to be playing. You want them to be proactive. You want them to be setting the tone. You want them to be leading on diplomacy. But under the Trump administration, we've seen career diplomats across the board within the State Department, a huge number of them laid off and sent packing, and Rex Tillerson taking a back seat, not participating in the meetings that determine the policy that he now is going to have to defend. So this makes America weaker. Right now, Mexico is upset. They're upset at the talk of tariffs. They're upset at the thought that they are going to take millions of people potentially from all sorts of countries and ship them into Mexico. I mean, this is causing diplomatic havoc.
Wendy?
Well, I've got to tell you, great minds think alike. I, too, was going to use a cleanup analogy. They're really part of a cleanup crew, if you will, in order to sort of smooth the feathers that have been ruffled through Donald Trump's tweets. His phone calls apparently go a lot better than his off-the-cuff tweets, the spur-of-the-moment, the hot mic way that he's used to communicating. But the fact that these diplomats are down there, and I'm using that term loosely, is a good thing for Donald Trump because they will be able to forge the type of relationships of trust that Donald Trump perhaps cannot. But I got to say one more thing, and this isn't just because Saturday Night Live keeps spoofing this. It is true that some of the other foreign leaders have become accustomed to Donald Trump spouting off with very dangerous rhetoric, only to not only himself dial it back, but have his chief advisors dial it back as well. So it's one of those scenarios where the growing relationships moving forward are based more on long-term prospects than on whatever Trump says at the spur of the moment. They're beginning to take more of what he says with a grain of salt. I don't know whether that's a good or a bad thing for Donald Trump, but if you're a foreign leader, you are going to be a little bit more skeptical.
Wendy, you were just saying cleaning up yesterday, and I'm sure you probably saw this on all the news shows. President Trump referred to parts of the immigration overhaul. He said this is a military operation. We saw that over and over and over again being played. But then he has his people down in Mexico saying, I repeat, this is not a military operation. How do you clean that up?
Well, I think he attempted to clean it up. Again, you know, the way it was spoken made it sound very ominous, and a lot of people took it as such. Words matter, and Donald Trump has learned that the hard way over the last year. It didn't prevent him from becoming elected, but it's more and more of an issue because you've got to choose your words more carefully. And so, again, damage control is an issue. But I got to say one thing, Shelley, regarding the travel ban in general. What they've tried to do is take away some of the main concerns that the courts had. Namely, if you're a permanent resident, green card holder, et cetera, that should not be subject to the ban. But it's going to be challenged anyway because of the broad swath of people that it covers. And again, one of the court's questions was, why these 7 countries, no matter that it came from the Obama administration, why these 7 countries, show me some statistics, et cetera. Unlike the first time where the lawyers had 48 hours to pull together a crash course in national security, they've had some more time here. So when this one is challenged, I'll bet you'll see better arguments on both sides.
Laura, I want you to chime in on this whole travel ban and the new one coming out today, but also expound, if you will, on the contradiction that we've been talking about, because when the president is saying something, we're saying that world leaders are starting to catch on to this, right? And then he sends his people out, and it's contradiction, unless there's another word for it that I'm not getting here.
Well, contradiction is a great word for it, but even more so, even more than the diplomacy and the fear around the issue of the deportation force, which is the phrase that he used on the campaign, and talking about deporting 11 million human beings from this country, which he recently has released guidance to local law enforcement and guidelines and plans to try to not just deport the folks that have been convicted of crimes, but really reach out and and expand that to virtually everyone who is here and who is undocumented. We're seeing local law enforcement push back against that, because if you have communities that are in fear for themselves and their families, it stops crimes from being reported and makes all of us less safe. We saw that in the words of Sheriff Bill Gore locally. We also saw it with San Diego City Chief of Police Shelley Zimmerman. Local law enforcement now will have a great tension with Donald Trump's DHS if these policies are pushed hard. And more importantly, it will really sort of hurt families and tear people apart. So that's a problem. Now, with respect to the double talk on all of this around the executive order with respect to the Muslim ban, his words are important there too. They're important because they could get him in trouble in federal court. When you campaign on a Muslim ban, then you can't just try to find a loophole in some creative legal language to cover it up and say, oh, well, this isn't a Muslim ban, here's a loophole, here's a this, here's a that. We saw that President Obama was actually held to account in a number of his cases that went to federal court where they used his words against him. Donald Trump, as we know, has said even more inflammatory things. So look, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. This order continues to be discriminatory, continues to isolate people of the Muslim faith, and I believe will be found to be unconstitutional.
Okay, Wendy, you're a lawyer. We were saying earlier words matter. Words on paper matter. The language used matters. That's the whole point of this. What do you expect to see today when the new travel ban is released?
Well, some of Donald Trump's rhetoric on the campaign trail has caught up with him. And while they call it a travel moratorium, that's different than a Muslim ban. Nonetheless, what they're looking at is what is the rationale behind this order? Why do they want it? Why did they choose the countries they did? And of course, the Trump administration says it's got nothing to do with your race or your ethnicity or nationality, et cetera. It has to do with those particular countries that pose a threat. But they've got to have the backup documentation. And no doubt they've been gathering that since the last time. Words matter on the campaign trail viscerally, and they matter now viscerally. But remember, the court of public opinion is very different than a court of law. So as much as it may sound bad or it may be very inflammatory when we think about the potential ramifications of this kind of a travel moratorium, it still is going to matter in paper what they actually say. Somebody had a great line. It was Alan Dershowitz. I wish I came up with it. Precedent trumps President Trump. Think about that. You have to look at legal precedent. That is going to be the way that the courts must arrive at their decision, not whatever President Trump would like. Now, hopefully they'll all be in accord. That's what the Trump administration says, that their ban is on solid legal footing, but it's ultimately going to be up to the courts, probably the highest court in the land eventually, to decide that.
All right, ladies, before we let you go, let's talk about President Trump ending the federal bathroom protections for transgender students. It began in the Obama administration. We've already heard from Caitlyn Jenner, who is a friend, should I say, of President Trump. There's been a lot of backlash. Do you think this is going to head to the Supreme Court, Laura?
Absolutely. Right now, Donald Trump is citing states' rights as his fig leaf for not defending the rights of transgender children and their right to equal opportunity in federal education. And the problem with that is that's pretty easy to take down. We saw that defense with respect to wanting to preserve slavery, with wanting to prevent women from getting the right to vote, from wanting to prevent interracial marriage, and from wanting to prevent gay marriage. That means the courts, consistent with previous rulings, are going to show that this is a federal civil right, and this is about human beings. Transgender kids should be able to have the same rights in California as they do in North Carolina, and vice versa. But most importantly, I think we need to think about what we would want for our kids. What would we want for our kids if our child was being bullied, if our child wanted to integrate and be part of normal life as a kid? And most importantly, we see that there's a transgender rate of suicide, that when kids are bullied, which they often are, of 50%. That means 1 out of every 2 trans kids attempts suicide. This is a life or death issue for these kids, and it's one that is tremendously disappointing that Donald Trump is not taking on.
All right, Wendy, you can have the last word today.
Yeah, just briefly. Good to give a lawyer the last word, right? So just very briefly,
words.
one of the things that Sean Spicer tried to really clear up in the press conference yesterday, it was a long press conference, the longest he's given thus far. A significant portion of it was dedicated to explaining that this is something that Donald Trump is basically saying it's a states' rights issue. He's not expressing his opinions on transgender individuals, whether they're kids, whether they're adults, whether they're in school. This is very different. We're talking about going to the bathroom. We're not talking about abortion or, owning guns or some of the other issues that he's really dug his heels on. This is something that he thinks should be decided by the states. That is the message that he's been trying to convey. He also was trying to convey that it's not a ban. He's only undoing guidance, not undoing a law, because remember that guidance was stalled in August of last year by the court system. That would be President Obama's guidance. So what Donald Trump is just trying to say, it should go to the states. Now, whether you believe or don't believe in that, what he's trying to do is really narrow the issue. That's the focus of the remarks and of what he did yesterday. But going forward, absolutely, this dispute is headed for the high court. No doubt about it.
All right, Laura, Wendy, we thank you both for your expertise as always. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Shali.
Raul.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Raul.
Shali.